around the world. Welcome to all my subscribers. Peace and love to everybody around the world. So this video here I've been trying to make for a few days, and hopefully I won't get interrupted again this time. But this is a very important video. I put a lot of research and study into this one here. And this will be a new argument for Daniel 9. It's not going to be the typical one that Christianity makes. I'm not just going to be talking about the 483 years from Artaxerxes to Jesus' death, which is pretty much the only thing Christians talk about. I got a whole array and assortment of evidence, and I'm going to show that the interpretation that Judaism offers it just simply cannot be the case. It cannot be factual. It's wrong. And I would urge, Tovia Singer, any of the other rabbis out there, Rabbi Skobach, anybody, to take this as a very friendly challenge and make a response to this, because I really do feel that this is absolutely concrete, because I basically will be attacking their interpretation from every conceivable angle. Before I get started, a little disclaimer. I'm not going to be talking about theology here. Every Jewish person feels that Christianity is a heresy, that Jesus is a heresy, and all of that. I'm not going to get into theology whatsoever. So I'm just focusing on Daniel 9, and that's it. Primarily numbers and such. But I refer everybody to my systematic theology, which I got published. It's available globally on Amazon. Okay, any Jewish person, I urge you, and anybody else, even Christians, atheists, Muslims, no matter what you are, if you want to know what the real original Christianity was and is, what it always has been, I urge you to get this book and read it. You'll learn how the Trinity is false. So real Christianity is non-Trinitarian. Jesus wasn't a sacrifice we have to atone for ourselves. Hell is not eternal. Jesus was not virgin born. I mean, there's a whole pile of stuff that I'm sure that most Jewish people would appreciate, and many others. I mean, even Christians, anybody really. But because this video I'm targeting Judaism and, hoping for a response, any Jewish person, please go refer to this. I'm not here to talk about theology. So anyways, Christians say that from King Artaxerxes in 454 BC, you count forward 483 years from Daniel's prophecy, you reach the year Jesus died in 29 AD. Everybody knows this. Judaism, of course, says that that's wrong. Christians interpret it wrong. So I'm here to talk about what Judaism's interpretation is and why that can't be correct, for very good reasons. And more importantly, to be unbiased, or as unbiased as possible. I'll present everything and, as neutral as possible, and then everybody in the audience can compare the two, what Judaism claims and then what Christianity claims, and then compare the two, right? Neutrally, unbiased, just compare them, and nobody in their right mind, after hearing the evidence I'm going to say today, would say that the evidence is favorable for Judaism's interpretation. It's just not going to happen. Quite simply isn't. So Judaism's claim, and I have Jews for Judaism's website open here. They have many pages on Daniel chapter 9. I've counted at least 3 or 4. But this is one of their pages on this topic. And I've highlighted one of their many conclusions that they make. And it really is a good conclusion, because in just a couple paragraphs we're going to basically see the gist of Judaism's interpretation. I've also got the original Masoretic Hebrew of Daniel 9, 25 and 26 that I'm going to read from, and I've also got for reference. And I've also got Chabad's timeline of Jewish history, so all of the biblical chronology, okay? And that's going to be very relevant when I'm talking about the numbers and proving who's right and who's wrong. Okay, I've also got a copy of the Cyrus Cylinder that King Cyrus commissioned or wrote. And I'll be reading from that as evidence. And I've also got the good old Tanakh. I'm not going to be reading anything from the New Testament. Okay, so what Judaism claims, I'll make the simple statement, then I'll read it from Jews for Judaism's website. Okay, the simple statement is that Judaism claims it cannot be Jesus who's spoken about in Daniel 9, 25 and 26. Okay, he can't be any of the anointed ones talked about. because Judaism says the numbers don't fit with Jesus, the time periods. Now, Judaism and Christianity both accept that Daniel was talking about 490 years. Okay, so I don't need to argue or prove anything there or read any verses. If we start at the beginning of chapter 9, in the first verses, Daniel says that he's there thinking about Jeremiah's 70-year prophecy. God sends an angel down. The angel tells Daniel in chapter 9, hey, it's actually 70 times 7, which is 490 years. So Jews and Christians, we all believe that to start with, that it's 490 years, right? So what it comes down to is where you start the 490 from, because it's 490. It's not going to be less or more than 490. It's got to be 490, right? So it depends where you start the measure of 490 from. That determines, obviously, where the 490 period ends. So Judaism essentially claims that, oh, well, the 490 doesn't fit with Jesus. Why? Because they've essentially, the timeline that they believe in has the 490-year period slid back further into the BC range. Okay, so it pulls it away from Jesus, or forward, whichever way, right? But it pulls it away from Jesus. And then they say, therefore, that, oh, well, look, the numbers don't fit with Jesus. It can't be Jesus. They have many other reasons why they think it can't be Jesus as well. Keeping things simple for right now. So their major claim is that the numbers just don't fit, right? That puts us, I mean, numbers don't lie, right? So if what they're saying is true, that the numbers don't fit with Jesus, then Jesus is out of the ballpark. We don't have to get into fussing over little words here in the rest of Daniel's chapter or other things or theological things, just focusing on the numbers as the primary thing, right? Not ignoring the other stuff, considering the other things, but primarily looking at the numbers. Numbers don't lie, right? So it either does fit with Jesus or it doesn't fit with Jesus. And we have to look at the argument that Christianity makes for their claim and the argument that Judaism makes for their claim. So Judaism's claim is that the measure of 490 years should be taken from the destruction of the first temple. This is what they say. And that the period of 490 years ends at the destruction of the second temple. Now, anybody doing simple arithmetic can clearly see that Judaism must have some further explanation to do, because that's more than 490 years. The first temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon in 580 something BC. Even though historians aren't pinpointed to the exact year, it's 580 something BC, maybe 83, maybe 85, maybe 87 or 89, but it's 580 something BC. That alone is 580 years until year 0, and then you got the other 69 or 70 years until the destruction of the second temple. That's about 650 or 660 years. That's way past 490. Now, obviously, Judaism is not that, ignorant. Obviously, the rabbis and everybody else in Judaism have already conceived of that. And the reason, their reasoning for why it differs is as follows, and it's best said from Jews for Judaism. That way it's not my wording or opinion. It says, although there appears to be a discrepancy in chronology between the Jewish and secular Gregorian calendars of 166 years, it is clear that Jewish record keeping is more reliable and consistent concerning these events. That's a pretty strong claim to make, right? But anyways, they continue, Babylonian calendars changed arbitrarily with every new Babylonian king, and limited archaeological discoveries, which I do agree with, often reflect their arbitrary chronology. According to secular chronology, 586 BC is the year associated with the destruction of the first Jewish temple. Okay, so that's straight from Jews for Judaism's website on this very page devoted to Daniel chapter 9, this very argument. Okay, so they openly admit that the chronology, the biblical chronology that Judaism follows, is vastly different from accepted historical chronology. Okay, so that's the first thing. Okay, now you'd have to then go into, I want to cover some other matters here, not just this number issue, right? But before I get into the other side things and then finish off with the numbers, you'd have to have a very good argument, plausible argument, justifying why you feel it is accurate to claim that the historical calendars are off. Because what Judaism essentially does is say that, oh, well, the first temple wasn't destroyed in 580 something BC, it was destroyed in like 430 BC. And by making that claim, they then say, oh, well, you add forward 490 years. Oh, what do you know? It comes at the fall of the Second Temple, which was decades after Jesus died, so Jesus doesn't fit. This is what Judaism's interpretation is, and their claim, their argument. But if you're going to make that argument, don't hide the fact that you're claiming that the historical calendars are off. And not just that, but also claiming that historical dating, historical study, and archaeology is inaccurate. It's a pretty strong claim to make. Okay? But that's not my only argument here in this video. Okay? Even though King Alexander destroyed Babylonian records, even though there aren't many archaeological fragments to ascertain times from with Babylon and Judaism at these time periods, even though that may be the case, there's a lot of other corroborating evidence from other nations and other records from other nations at the time that back up that, yeah, there were these certain Persian or Median from the Medes, rulers from the Medes and from the Babylonians, and they all have records of these peoples. Okay, different nations do. And even though sometimes people get the ages or the birth years or the death years or the times and order of reigns mixed up, even modern historians somewhat contradict each other on these things or somewhat differ. Even though there is variance there, it is pretty much accepted that there was a very large period of recorded history, recorded by many different nations, that elapsed between the actual fall of Israel and its first temple and until, for example, year zero. There is, or any other time, even until Artaxerxes, we know that there's been a vast period of time. A lot of these things have been recorded. Once King Alexander and the Greeks and the Romans were getting into power, then more accurate record keeping was made that was shared more globally, and it's more globally accessible. Before then, during the Persians, the Medes, and the Babylonians, so much was being destroyed, and subsequently after that, so much was destroyed from that time period. And even biblical, the last books of the Tanakh were written around this time period. There aren't any more books of the Tanakh after this time period. And during this invasion time period of Babylon, the Jews were scattered. They lost their access to their temple, their scrolls, their rabbis even. Not everybody had access to the scripture, right? So that was a dark time in history when a lot of knowledge and everything was lost. But many other nations still recorded things that went on in Israel, Babylon, Persia, and all that. And there were a lot of kings that ruled. There was a large period of time. And it doesn't allow for what Judaism claims. Okay, Judaism claims that historical calendars are off by like 160 something years. That's a pretty strong claim. We're not talking about 5 or 10 or even 20 or whatever. We're talking about 160 years. Okay? And they have to make that claim in order to back up, their other claim where they say that it was 490 from the fall of the first temple to the fall of the second. That mathematically is not accurate with history. So in order for that claim to be backed up, they have to say, oh, well, historical dating is off. Okay? But so you're saying that all the scientific machines that date things are off. You're saying that the historians and all their degrees and knowledge and expertise, that they're inaccurate and wrong and off. And you're also claiming that all the historical records from different nations are also just off. Like it's a big global conspiracy throughout thousands of years to askew the historical actual calendar. I don't think that's very plausible. Okay? So, but that's just one point. Okay? That's a major point that they have a different timeline. So I will get into that timeline after I cover the other minor points of evidence first. Okay? So I have got Chabad's chronology of Jewish history here, which is lifted right from the Tanakh. And I've gone through the Tanakh myself, and I've mapped out all the patriarchs' age when they had their child and so forth. So I've mapped out all the time period up until the Exodus. It's all right here. And you'll see that my notes match up exactly with Chabad's mathematics up until a certain point. And then at a certain point, suddenly the Jewish chronology jumps off by about 200 years. Okay, that's just how it goes. And I can't explain why. It doesn't make any sense. I think it's got to do with some obscurity around the time of when they were going into Egypt. But there are verses to back up what I've got here. So I'll get to that in a moment because I'll take a little bit longer. So some of the other points that I want to make are And also, I'll just read this from Jews to Judaism so that people know that I'm not making this up. It says, the angel Gabriel reveals to Daniel this additional understanding of the 70 years, extending them from 70 years to 70 weeks of years, stretching the time span to 490 years, that span from the destruction of the first temple to the destruction of the second temple. Okay? That's 650, 660 year difference. That's why the following paragraph says, oh, well, the calendars are off 160 years, but we have it right. Okay? So I'll get to the timeline and compare that in a moment. But what Judaism claims is that when you read Daniel chapter 9, 25 and 26, it talks about the 490-year prophecy, which is 70 weeks. Okay? Now, Christians take it as there will be 69 weeks from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, and Christians take that as King Artaxerxes' decree in 454 BC. So you measure forward 69 weeks, which is 483 years, you do actually come to the year Jesus died, 29 AD. And nobody's going to fuss over a few years, but it does work out exactly. I've even seen a prominent rabbi at a lecture, watching the video of it, wasn't there, speaking to his Jewish audience saying that the numbers for Jesus are very convincing. However, we refuse to believe that he was the Messiah for a various array of reasons. But anybody can see that it does fit uncannily with Jesus there, right? So we have to look at other things, right? We can't just end it right there and say, oh, it fits. We have to examine it deeper from many different angles, right? I'll get to the timeline thing in a moment. So the 69 weeks, so 483 years. Now, in Judaism, they differ very greatly from what Christianity teaches. Christianity just says, 69 weeks, 483 years from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem is when Messiah will be cut off. Judaism says, oh no, that's totally wrong. It's got nothing to do with the Messiah. It's just two anointed individuals, two anointed guys. Okay? One of them is going to be cut off, and the first one was King Cyrus. Okay, so in 925, they say the Messiah mentioned there, the anointed one is just King Cyrus. They say that the one who is cut off in 26 is actually an anointed guy, and they have a few options of who it could have possibly been, but they're not absolutely certain. There actually are like a list of options, because they don't have it pinned down who it was. But they're so sure it wasn't Jesus, but they're not even sure who the second anointed guy was. But they're sure it's not the Messiah, it's just some anointed guy. They're very sure it's just some anointed guy, but they don't know which anointed guy it is. Let's just stress that. So what Judaism says is that Christians are wrong when they take it as 69 weeks. Because the way this is what Judaism says, the way you're supposed to read 925, 926, is that there's going to be 7 weeks, which is 49 years, from the destruction of the first temple until you get an anointed one, who was King Cyrus. Now, if you look at the historical record, which Judaism claims is wrong, but let's not go there again, that further complicates things, confuses things, but the historical record says 586 BC, Israel and the temple fell. And historians even agree, 49, 50 years later, King Cyrus rose to power and, allowed the Jews to go back to Israel and gave a decree to build a temple. So even history agrees, it kind of lines up with the Bible. The Bible says Nebuchadnezzar in Neo-Babylon, he was in his 18th year before the downfall of Israel. So that would be, 18, basically 20 years, plus the 50 after. That's the 70 years under Babylon that Jeremiah spoke about, the more carnal 70 years. But then we're told that there's, the heavenly higher period, the 490. Man, God told Daniel through an angel, so we can't ignore that one. But there were 70, carnal or, physical years as well, right? So 20 before the fall, then 50 afterwards. So history does say, 50 years after the fall of Israel, we got King Cyrus. Judaism says, we agree with that, but we just say that the dates are wrong. That's what Judaism's claim is. And the more you start to hear Judaism's claim in its raw form, the more shaky the ground that it's standing on comes across as. Okay? Because it's more conjecture, and theory than actual verifiable types of facts. Okay, or ascertainable things like dating and historical records, and comparing historical records show, but Judaism says, oh no, they're just wrong, we keep the better records. So anyways, Judaism says that 49 years later, which they take, I guess, as from, if they say it was around 430 BC when the temple actually fell, then 50 years later after that would be, what is it, 380 BC. Okay? And then from there, there's 434 years that remain, which are the 62 weeks. 7 weeks plus 62 weeks is 69 weeks, which is 483 years. So Judaism says that after King Cyrus arrived as that first anointed guy, that there would then be 434 years in which the second temple would be rebuilt, okay, culminating in its destruction in 70 AD. Okay, so that's basically the synopsis of what Judaism teaches. Okay, I've already discussed the first problem with their claims of the historical dates are wrong. Okay, first major problem. Let's put that to the side. Number one, there's two things I want to talk about. King Cyrus is one of them, but before I do that, let me just get into this other one here, because this is probably quicker. If we actually look at the original Hebrew Masoretic, the actual original Hebrew, okay, and we compare that to all these different sources that Judaism uses, right? Whether it be the Orthodox Jewish Bible, whether it be Chabad's text that they have available. I've compared 4 or 5 different ones at one time. They all had different wording for Daniel 9:25 and 9:26. A lot of them had words inserted in brackets that weren't in the original text, and they even admit that in the footnotes. Okay, so I literally compared 4 or 5 together at one time. All Jewish sources of the biblical text claiming to be the accurate original, and they all differed. Okay, and you're not allowed to add a dot or a letter to the text. You're not allowed to take away a dot or a letter from the Tanakh. You know what I mean? You're not allowed to twist any dots or letters even. So it's very dangerous when you start putting words in brackets and saying that, oh, these words should be here or should be taken as saying this. Okay? If you read the actual original Hebrew, it says, and I can't pronounce Hebrew, but it says, Watida Wataskel, which means, therefore, know and understand, min Mosa Dabar, from the going forth of the command or word, whatever, from the going forth of the command, Lehasib Wilibnot, to restore and build Jerusalem, ad Mashiach Nagid, until Messiah the Prince, Sabuim Siba with Sabuim, Sisim Usenayim, week 7 and week 60 and 2. So let's just look at it right there. It says at the very start of Daniel's prophecy, it says from the going forth, I've just got to watch my phone, from the going forth of the command or word, whichever one. Well, I've got to refine this video down from all the minor, more petty arguments that I've heard out there before, so it's keeping it simple. It says, from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem. That's a more important thing. I'm not fussing over the word command or word, debar, or whatever. It says to restore and build Jerusalem. At the end of the day, it's not talking about the temple. King Cyrus never issued Jerusalem to be rebuilt. He mentioned Jerusalem by name, but he never ever gave a word or command or any type of instruction, anything or imperative to get Jerusalem rebuilt. Okay? And lower down in verse 25, it specifically says, and shall be built the street and the wall. Okay? With Nebnatah, Rahob, Waharus, Ubesok, Hayitim, and even in troublesome times. Okay? Specifically, Jerusalem will be rebuilt, and the street and the wall. Now, King Cyrus never gave a command, order, word, instruction, anything to do this, and it never got done, either during his rule or afterwards, for a very long time. In fact, Jerusalem was never rebuilt, street and wall inclusive, until King Artaxerxes made a decree in 454 BC. This is verified by the Tanakh itself. It's verified also by historians who don't even believe in the Bible. King Artaxerxes, historically and biblically, gave a command to restore and build Jerusalem. In Nehemiah 2, for example, just one example, in verses 16 and 17, I think it is, they literally talk about building the walls. Okay? To save time, I'm not going to get into it, but the Tanakh, and any rabbi would know, the Tanakh does explicitly say that King Artaxerxes issued the decree that got Jerusalem built, and they actually built Jerusalem. Okay? Including street and walls. Now, it's important to stress that this is specifically what Daniel said. We can't add to or take away from or twist what he said, the word of God. We have to look at what it says. It says from the going forth of the command, imperative, whatever you want to call it, to restore and build Jerusalem, including street and wall, until Messiah Nagid, Mashiach Nagid, Messiah the Prince, Okay, so for the point number one, like I said, King Cyrus never gave a decree to rebuild Jerusalem, confirmed by the Tanakh and confirmed by historians, by history. Okay? Point number one. Point number two, Judaism actually says that, oh, well, we don't say the decree in the start of the measure of 490 starts from Cyrus, like I just read from the website. What they say is it starts from the fall of the first temple. But in order for that claim to be valid, they have to say that the dating is off in history, right? But let's not go there again. Okay, so that's 2 points. Point number three is, I've already talked about how the numbers don't fit, right? So that's the separate argument. Point number three is that nobody, whether in history or in the Tanakh, can actually prove that there was a command or order or whatever to rebuild Jerusalem at the fall of the first temple. It's easy, and I've heard the rabbis actually say with their own lips, oh, I'm not quoting them, but like, we weren't there. We don't know what they said, and it's not written down anywhere, but we could only imagine that surely people said at the time, oh, we must rebuild Jerusalem. You know what I mean? Like, just like a universal, general type of decree. I don't think that's good enough. To make a claim of conjecture like that, like you assume that such a thing would be said and that you could give it such weight to such an assumption and conjecture, I just think it's not a very reasonable thing to do. Okay? Going by what Daniel says, he's talking about taking a very important measure of time. It would be very important when that time measure starts from. It's not going to be an obscure thing. It's going to be a very fixed thing. And he says from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, street and wall, until Messiah the Prince. Now, rebuilding Jerusalem is a very significant thing. Messiah, an anointed prince, whoever he might be, whether it's Jesus, the Messiah, or some anointed guy, these are significant things. He's not saying from, this lump of sand to this rock. These are significant things, right? Now, he says that the time period between these significant things is 7 weeks, 60 and 2. Now, I'm not going to waste 10 minutes getting into the, sub-argument over how the how this is worded. Judaism makes a big deal about this, saying that Christians lump the, excuse me, my throat's drying out. I need a glass of water. But Judaism spends a lot of time arguing that Christians lump it together as 69 weeks, meaning the 7 weeks and the 62 weeks, so that they can validate Jesus. This is what I always hear Judaism saying. But the ironic thing is that Judaism is the one guilty of tiddling with things. Okay? Judaism is claiming that in order to validate Jesus, Christians have to lump the 7 and the 62 into the 69 weeks in order to validate Jesus. That's their claim. And they're like, oh, look how bad Christianity is. They have to do this. And look at the text. It says week 7 and week 60 and 2. Clearly, that's 7 weeks separated from 62 weeks. Judaism makes a big deal about this. But at the end of the day, we're talking about an origin point on a timeline, A, with an ending point, B, and a fixed measure of time in between, 490 years. Okay? If we're zooming in on the 483, whatever, right? But the 490 years between point A and point B. Okay? One sec, let me regain my train of thought there. Yes. So, I just want to point out something very, very logical here. If we're talking about a point A and a point B and a fixed length of time in between, does it really matter? I mean, the fixed time in between is 69 weeks, or 70, whichever one we're looking at, right? But 69 weeks. It doesn't matter how you write it. If you write it as 69 individual ones or whatever, it still mathematically totals the sum of 69 weeks, 483 years. It really doesn't matter how many slices you put in there or how you arrange them, because it's a period of time of 490 years between a point A and a point B. So I think that argument that Judaism always makes is kind of futile. There will be 483 years between A and B, whether you like it or not. This is how reality works. And Daniel said, from the decree to rebuild until Messiah the Prince, that's from an A to a B, there is this period of time. And no matter how Judaism wants to stretch out these side arguments on this, at the end of the day, like I said, It's from A to B with 483 years in between. No matter how you want to spin things in wording and portray this and that as that and Christians as this, at the end of the day, you can't change that. It's from A to B, 483 years. Okay? Judaism says, oh, but it's 49 years, 7 weeks until the anointed one, who was Cyrus. And then 62 weeks where they're rebuilding Jerusalem. Okay? Now, the only problem is that's really just a futile argument. I mean, what is the sense of even presenting that as, evidence against Christianity's interpretation? I mean, like I just said with the A, B, and the fixed figure in between. It doesn't matter. The one who is actually chopping and changing things is Judaism, because they're saying in this period of 483 years, there is a slice here after 7 weeks. There's a 7-week cake slice and a 62-week cake slice. That's what Judaism is saying. A giant slice of cake 62 weeks wide and a small slice of cake 7 weeks wide. You got the first small slice first, and then you get the rest of the cake. It doesn't matter how many times you slice it. You still got that length of cake between point A and point B. You follow me? So I think it's just a futile argument anyways. But since they want to dwell on it so much, they say that after 7 weeks came King Cyrus, the anointed one. He's called anointed once in the entirety of the Bible in one of the latter chapters of Isaiah. Scholars agree that these chapters of Isaiah, the last few, well, the last ones after, I think it was like chapter 40 or after chapter 39, that these were later additions. Okay, not taking away from whatever, but I'm just relaying something. Okay, I could care less whether they are original or later additions. It doesn't bother me. I still regard the whole of Isaiah as scripture anyways, right? So it's not a big deal to me, but I just want to point out scholars do mention that's a later addition. So it is open to the possibility that someone who is really inclined to like Cyrus put that in there. Okay, but let's not go there for the sake of this video. Okay, if Judaism really wants to dwell on the fact that, oh, we got King Cyrus, the anointed one, after the initial 7 weeks, and this is the big deal, Christians have everything wrong, it's got nothing to do with Jesus, okay, then let's critically examine Judaism's claim. They're saying that King Cyrus was Messiah Nagid. Now, the problem is, if you search the Tanakh, like I've done many times before, we do it again right now, search the Masoretic for Cyrus, we get 19 results in the Tanakh. Okay? Every single one of these results calls Cyrus a king. Every single one. 2 Chronicles 36:22, Cyrus king of Persia. 2 Chronicles 36:23, Cyrus king of Persia. Ezra 1:1, Cyrus king of Persia. Ezra 1:7, King Cyrus. Ezra 1:8, Cyrus king of Persia. Ezra 3:7, Cyrus king of Persia. Ezra 4:3, King Cyrus king of Persia. Ezra 4:5, Cyrus king of Persia. Ezra 5:13, Cyrus king of Babylon. Cyrus the king. Ezra 5:14 has Cyrus the king. Ezra 5:17, Cyrus the king. Ezra 6:3, Cyrus the king. Cyrus the king. Ezra 6:14, the decree of Cyrus and Darius and Artaxerxes king of Persia. Ezra 44:28, who is saying of Cyrus my shepherd. Isaiah 45:1, to his anointed, to Cyrus. So those are the only two, Isaiah 44 and Isaiah 45, the only two that don't call him a king, besides Ezra 6:14, where it's not specifying his king status. But every other mention, he's a king. Daniel 1:21, Cyrus the king. Daniel 6:28, Cyrus the Persian, in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Daniel 10:1, in the 3rd year of Cyrus king of Persia. So there's not one mention anywhere in the entirety of the Tanakh, or even historical record, that King Cyrus was Prince Cyrus. So why make the claim, the huge claim that Messiah Nagid is King Cyrus? It says Nagid, prince. Cyrus was never called a prince in the Tanakh. You see my point? So that's a very good point to make. There's no basis to justify believing that Cyrus is this first anointed one. Okay? There's no grounds to it. Now, on top of that, Judaism is very quick. 1 second, I gotta go outside for a few minutes. Give me about 2 to 5 minutes at the most. Alright, I apologize for that. I don't know how long that took, but anyway, so we'll get back to the program here. So King Cyrus is what I was talking about. So Judaism wants to make a big deal about King Cyrus. Okay, that he was this anointed one in Daniel 9:25. Now, if King Cyrus really was so special and all that, what made him so special? Well, Judaism says that he was regarded as anointed because he helped commission the building of the temple and the repatriation, if that's the right word, the Jews to go back to Israel. Right? Those are very important and prophetic. Those are things that are supposed to take place in biblical prophecy, anyways. Right? So, from an outside perspective, yeah, you could say, oh yeah, it looks like King Cyrus was messianic in a way, you could argue. But you also have to look at his character, what he believed, and all of that. So King Cyrus, by the way, he didn't favor the Jews. He didn't love Israel or anything particular about Judaism, the people, the land, or the religion. He actually extended the same offer to all pagan religions and peoples back then. It wasn't just like, oh, I love the Jews and Israel and the God of Abraham, and I want them to build a temple because I honor their God, you know what I mean? Or I fear their God. It wasn't anything to do with that. He literally gave an open invitation to every pagan, belief system to go build their own pagan temples and do what they want to do and go back, repatriate, and whatever, right? So he enabled all paganism everywhere. So the irony in this is that Judaism wants to tout Cyrus as this messianic type figure here, but in reality, he was the complete polar opposite to what the Tanakh sets as an example. Like the law of Moses, don't tolerate idolatry in your borders, even outside your borders. Don't let the name of foreign gods come off your lips. Don't this, don't that. Don't tolerate idolatry in any way, shape, or form. And it's so strict. I mean, all those people got put to death with the golden calf. I mean, and time again in the Tanakh, we see these things happen. Idolatry is a very serious thing, according to the Tanakh. And King Cyrus enabled all forms of paganism. It wasn't just he enabled Judaism. He enabled all paganism. Okay, so that's not a very honorable thing. That is the exact polar opposite to what was laid down through Moses. That's an observational point right there. Observational point number 2 is that King Cyrus, as evidenced in his own Cyrus cylinder, which I'm going to read from now, he worshipped the Babylonian god Marduk. Okay, Marduk is mentioned in the Bible. In Babylon, he was also known as Bel. Babel, the Tower of Babel, was actually built in ode to Marduk. Okay, the Tower of Babel is a significant thing in biblical chronology. Very significant event. Okay, it was about the second downfall of man, and man had to be scattered. Okay, and that tower was built in ode. The whole city, Babel, was gateway of Marduk, the chief god of the Babylonians and other nations. Okay, now Cyrus openly worshipped King Marduk, and not before the biblical events transpired, but before, during, and after the biblical events transpired. In the Cyrus cylinder, he's literally celebrating military and other victories, including the ones referenced in the Bible. Okay, but if we actually read, the, here it is. If we actually read the cylinder, it's not that long, so it'll only take me a couple minutes to read it. There's some missing text. When there's a portion of missing text, I'll just raise my hand up or something, right? So it says, when of the 4 quarters, an incompetent person was installed to exercise lordship over his country, and he imposed upon them. A counterfeit of Esagila he made, and for and the rest of the cultic centers. A ritual which was improper to them, an unholy display offering without fear, daily recited. Irreverently, he put an end to the regular offerings, and he interfered with the cultic centers he established in the sacred centers. By his own plan, he did away with the worship of Marduk, the king of the gods. This isn't talking about Cyrus. It's talking about the bad guy before Cyrus. Okay? He continually did evil against Marduk's city. I need a drink of water really bad. Daily, without interruption, he imposed the corvée upon its inhabitants unrelentingly, ruining them all. Upon hearing their cries, the Lord of the gods, and this isn't the God of Abraham, this is Marduk they're talking about now. Upon hearing their cries, the Lord of the gods became furiously angry, and their borders, the gods who lived among them, forsook their dwellings, angry that he had brought them to Babylon. Marduk, the exalted, the Lord of the gods, turned towards all the habitations that were abandoned, and all the people of Sumer and Akkad who had become corpses. He was reconciled and had mercy upon them. He examined and checked all the entirety of the lands, all of them. He searched everywhere, and then he took a righteous king, his favorite, by the hand. He called out his name, Cyrus, king of Ansan. He pronounced his name to be king over all the world. Now, is this the God of Abraham picking out Cyrus, like the Bible claims? No, this is Marduk, god of Babylon, selecting Cyrus, in Cyrus's own words. Okay? So Marduk made Cyrus. He made the land of Gutuim and all the Uman, Manda, Bo in submission at his feet. And he, Cyrus, shepherded with justice and righteousness all the black-headed people, which means black-haired people, over whom he had given him victory. Marduk, the great lord, guardian of his people, looked with gladness upon his good deeds and upright heart, meaning the heart of Cyrus. He ordered him to go to his city Babylon. He set him on the road to Babylon, and like a companion and friend he went at his side. His vast army, whose number, like the water of a river, cannot be known, marched at his side fully armed. He made him enter his city Babylon without fighting or battle. He saved Babylon from hardship. He delivered Nabonidus, the king who did not revere him, into his hands. All the people of Babylon, all the land of Sumer and Akkad, princes and governors, bowed to him and kissed his feet. They rejoiced at his kingship, and their faces shone. Lord, by whose aid the dead were revived. And so this god Marduk claims to be able to resurrect people too, right? Just in case you didn't know Babylonian religion, right? So the Lord, by whose aid the dead were revived, and all who had been redeemed from hardship and difficulty, they greeted him with gladness and praised his name. It says, I am Cyrus, king of the world, great king, mighty king, king of Babylon, king of Sumer and Akkad, king of the four quarters, the son of Cambyses, great king, king of Ansan, grandson of Cyrus, great king, king of Ansan, descendant of Tiespes, great king, king of Ansan, of an eternal line of kingship, whose rule Bel, Marduk, and Nabu, who's also mentioned in the Bible, love. Pretty sure Nabu's mentioned. It might be Nebo, but whatever. Whose kingship they desire for their heart's pleasure. When I entered Babylon in a peaceful manner, I took up my lordly abode in the royal palace amidst rejoicing and happiness. Marduk, the great lord, established at his fate for me a magnanimous heart of one who loves Babylon, and I daily attended to his worship. So this is Cyrus, daily attending to the worship of Marduk. My vast army marched into Babylon in peace. I did not permit anyone to frighten the people of Sumer and Akkad. I brought the welfare of the city of Babylon and all its sacred centers. I sought the welfare of the city of Babylon and all its sacred centers. As for the citizens of Babylon, upon whom he had imposed upon whom he imposed a corvée which was not the God's wish and was not befitting them, I relieved their weariness and freed them from their service. Marduk, the great lord, rejoiced over my good deeds. So this is about Cyrus liberating the Babylonians, and worshiping Marduk, right, so far. We're almost at the end. And in peace before him we moved around in friendship by his exalted word, all the kings who sit upon thrones throughout the world, from the upper sea to the lower sea, who live in the districts far off, the kings of the west who dwell in tents, all of them, brought their heavy tribute before me, and in Babylon they kissed my feet. From Babylon to Ashur, and from Susa, Agade, Asuna, Zamban, Miturnu, Dur, as far as the region of Gutuim, the sacred centers on the other side of the Tigris River, whose sanctuaries had been abandoned for a long time. This is the key part. I returned the images of the gods who had resided there to their places, and I let them dwell in eternal abodes. Right there, Cyrus reinforced idolatry. Okay, so why does Judaism put Cyrus on a pedestal? Right, but anyways, I gathered all their inhabitants and returned them to their dwellings. So just like I claimed, Cyrus's decree, wasn't out of love for Jews and Israel and all that, or for their God. He did it for everybody. Let's read it again. I returned the images of the gods who had resided there to their places, and I let them dwell in eternal abodes. I gathered all their inhabitants and returned them to their dwellings. Not just the Jews, okay? So anyways, continuing, in addition, at the command of Marduk, the great lord, I settled in their habitations in pleasing abodes, the gods of Smyrna-Akkad, whom Nabonidus, to the anger of the Lord of the gods, had brought into Babylon. May all the gods whom I settled in their sacred centers ask daily of Bel and Nabu that my days be long and they may intercede for my welfare. May they say to Marduk, my lord, quote, as for Cyrus the king who reveres you, and Cambyses his son. End of prayer. The people of Babylon blessed my kingship, and I settled all the lands in peaceful abodes. I daily increased the number of offerings to geese, 2 ducks, and 10 turtle doves above the former offerings of geese, ducks, and turtle doves. So I don't need to read the rest of it. So that's King Cyrus's cylinder. He worshipped the god Marduk. These are the very victories that are talked about in the Bible. Okay, this is the very same time where Cyrus rose to power. That is the time period spoken about in the Bible. Okay, when Cyrus rose to power and subdued Babylon. Cyrus gave all that authority and glory to Marduk. He never gave a droplet of glory to the God of Israel. He never really cared specifically about the Jews or Israel. He just extended the offer to everybody. Hey, do whatever form of worship you want. Build your temples. Have your idols and your gods. And Israel and the Jews just happen to be one of the bunches of people. Okay? So when Isaiah, and if Isaiah actually did call Cyrus my shepherd, that could have just been tongue-in-cheek or an allusion. But more importantly, where it says my anointed, I'm not going to fuss over if that's authentically in the original text or if it was a later addition calling Cyrus anointed. But all I can say is this: if God did at some point declare Cyrus to be an anointed one or like an anointed one, it's obviously conditional. It's not going to be eternal. And obviously we know from history, and we know from everything I just said, that Cyrus was not an honorable person. He wasn't worthy of being called an anointed one. In Judaism, according to Judaism, the holy anointing oil, could go on anybody who deserved it, but primarily kings, priests, and prophets. Not anybody could just go get it. You had to be deserving of it, or at least of those positions, and deserving of it occupying those positions. And the oil itself, the mundane carnal oil, was extended by the priest or whoever. But all of it came down from God. Okay? It's not that a guy gets to decide, oh, I'm anointed, or this and that there. It's something that's God ordained. Okay? So if Cyrus really was anointed by God, and it was God ordained anointing, then who is the one that anointed him? Who did the carnal physical anointing? No king, no Jewish king, priest, or prophet anointed Cyrus. So who anointed Cyrus? Are you going to claim that God did it himself? Well, if Judaism wants to make that claim, that's the exact same claim that Christians have of Jesus in the Jordan River when he got baptized and God approved of him. So if you want to say that that's bogus with Christianity, you have to apply that same criticism to yourself. Okay? So that's another good point. So Cyrus wasn't even worthy of being called an anointed one. He was a horrible, one of the worst heathen pagans that ever existed. Besides that, another excellent point to make is that in the Tanakh itself, it openly tells us that King Cyrus was evil. If we go over to Daniel chapter 10, okay, you read in verse 1, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a thing is revealed to Daniel. Okay? We read down, so he's already introduced Cyrus, king of Persia. Again, not the prince, but the king of Persia. And then an angel comes to Daniel and reveals to Daniel something amazing. Okay? And not just any angel, but Michael, the chief of the angels. Even Judaism acknowledges Michael as the chief angel. And it says here, in verse 12, and he said unto me, the first angel, he said unto me, do not fear, Daniel, for from the first day that you did give your heart to understand and to humble thyself before thy God, not Marduk, but the real God, thy words have been heard, and I have come because of thy words. And the head of the kingdom of Persia is standing over against me 21 days. And lo, Michael, first of the chief heads, has come in to help me, and I have remained there near the kings of Persia. And I have come to cause thee to understand that which does happen to thy people in the latter end of the days, for the vision is yet after days. So, again, this is Daniel chapter 10. In verse 1, Daniel introduces the subject, King Cyrus of Persia, Cyrus, king of Persia, and that God is going to reveal something to Daniel. Then an angel appears, And the angel tells Daniel, hey, Daniel, we're here listening to your words. And in verse 13, the head of the kingdom of Persia is opposing this angel. Now, of course, I'm not going to get into the side argument. Judaism teaches angels don't have free will. I'm not getting into that. I believe they do. But let's not go there for the sake of the brevity of this video. Okay? At the end of the day, we hear the angel that God sent to Daniel to give him understanding. And the angel tells Daniel something to be understood. He says that, hey, I'm an angel, and I'm here fighting against the head of the kingdom of Persia. Now let's do some rocket science. Rocket Science 101, Class 101 here, university level folks, okay? In verse 13 it says, the head of the kingdom of Persia. Gee, I wonder who that is. When just 12 verses earlier, in the same chapter it says, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. So verse 13, the head of the kingdom of Persia. Gee, I wonder who it could be talking about. It just introduced Cyrus, king of Persia, who's been mentioned a lot in the other chapters, and then bam, verse 13, the head of the kingdom of Persia is standing over against me. We see Judaism says that this is an angel. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but do we really have any evidence for that scripturally? I mean, no. In the rest of the Tanakh, there's no evidence for that whatsoever. There's nowhere else in the Tanakh where any evidence for that type of claim will be substantiated. And just going by this portion of Daniel itself, it says Cyrus, king of Persia, and here we have the head of the kingdom of Persia. Okay, so clearly that's who I think it is. And then I'm just finishing off this video. I had to read. Alright. So I know that they would argue, and they would say that this is an angel, and it's because of the term head. Okay, because it says Michael, first of the chief heads. Okay, so fine, fair argument, right? It could be, it may not be. But is there any supporting evidence throughout the rest of the Tanakh? No, there isn't. Okay? But I will admit, maybe it was an angel. But you can't discount my proposition that it could actually be talking about the king of Cyrus. Now, in either case, whether the head of the kingdom of Persia is King Cyrus, who actually was the head of the kingdom of Persia, or if it was talking about a spiritual being, an angel, or whatever, in either case, what does this show you with logic? It shows you that Persia was an evil kingdom that was doing naughtiness. Okay? After all, the whole prophecies of Daniel talk about those beasts that rise up from the earth, and one of the beasts is Persia. You know what I mean? So we're openly told that Persia is one of the beast kingdoms. Then we're told, throughout Daniel, and then we're told here that the head of the kingdom of Persia. So it doesn't matter if it was an angel instructing Cyrus or over the kingdom, or if it was Cyrus. Who cares? It doesn't matter, because the kingdom itself, Persia, was not good. So I kind of doubt, personally, that God would regard Cyrus as an actual shepherd, an actual messianic anointed figure. Okay? Maybe at one point, but then Cyrus tainted it by worshiping Marduk. I don't know. But I think it's more reasonable to lean towards that, yeah, no, Persia was bad, Cyrus was bad. He's not to be seen in a good light. I think there's a lot of evidence. It's far more reasonable to side with that than to say, oh no, we think Cyrus is actually a good guy. No. You got to pick between one of the two. It makes a lot more sense to agree with what I just suggested, right? So it doesn't matter if it was an angel or if it is King Cyrus, but it probably could actually be referring to King Cyrus, right? Very good point to make. So Judaism makes this big deal about we had to wait for 7 weeks from the fall of the first temple till we got the first anointed one, King Cyrus. This big, great guy. He did all these good things for Israel and for the Jews and this and that there. This is the story that they spin. And then that 434 years later, it was the destruction of the second temple. Right? So I've just gone through all those reasons. I'm not going to do a recap of why their theory doesn't make sense. It doesn't line up with the numbers. Cyrus wasn't a good guy. He worshipped Marduk. He enabled idolatry. Okay? The way Daniel's prophecy is actually written in the Hebrew it says that you measure from a point A to a point B a distance of 483 years. It doesn't matter how you chop the slices, like Judaism tries to claim. Oh, it's a slice of 7, then a slice of 62. It doesn't matter, because even if it was 69 ones, it's still 69 weeks from a point A to a point B. Right? All these things that I already mentioned and went over, in conjunction with the fact that Judaism's claim that historical dating is off by 160 years, when you factor all that in together, you can already see that when you're comparing the baskets of evidence, you have Christianity, it's sweet and simple like a golden nugget. Oh, history confirms that in 454, King Artaxerxes made an actual recorded decree, which even the Tanakh records, to rebuild Jerusalem, which is what Daniel specified here, including specifically and explicitly the street and the walls. So that's what Christianity claims. And 483 years later, bam, Jesus died, right? You compare that basket of evidence, very clean, simple, and sweet, to the basket of evidence that I've just shown Judaism presenting. What's one of their pieces of evidence? Oh, the calendars are off 160 years. Yeah, that don't really go well. You compare that to Christianity. They agree with the historians' calendars. What's more plausible at face value? From a neutral, unbiased perspective, what would you tend to side with? Somebody who says, oh, I think the calendars are off by 160 years. Well, let's hear your reasoning for it. That's why I got this, to prove that they are wrong anyways to start with. So a lot of good reasons why it's not that. It clearly says it to be 483 years. Doesn't matter how you want to word it, chop or change the cake slices, it's 483 years. Okay? King Cyrus never issued that decree. That decree was never recorded in the Tanakh from the time of the fall of the temple all the way up until Cyrus. Somewhere in Ezra it says that Cyrus's decree went null and void all the way up until the reign of Darius. Okay, so even the Bible, even the Tanakh says that Cyrus's decree went null and void. What that also tells you in hand at the same time is that if there was an imaginary decree before Cyrus, like Judaism claims, that even that was further null and void. So by that verse in Ezra saying that, the decree to rebuild was null and void until Darius, and we know further from the Tanakh that even with Darius it continued to be null and void, and even Artaxerxes at first commissioned the stopping of the rebuilding, but then later had a change of heart and said, no, I'm going to do the right thing and allow them to rebuild. All of this is fully recorded in the Tanakh. There's no room for argument. So I don't think there's any reasonable basis to say that you should take the measure from the fall of the first temple to start with. It's from the decree to restore and build Jerusalem. When you look at the Tanakh for evidence, it says Artaxerxes made that decree. When you look at history for evidence, it says Artaxerxes made that decree. So compare the baskets of evidence. What Christianity claims, sweet and simple, history agrees with it, or what Judaism claims, a whole pile of conjecture and basically conspiracy theories saying that history's off by 160 years. You compare all that, you know what I mean? Now, Judaism also says, in order for their interpretation to be right, that after the 7 weeks we got King Cyrus, then we had 434 years in which Jerusalem was rebuilt. Well, guess what? Jerusalem did not take 434 years to rebuild. It didn't. Okay, it only took a few years to rebuild. That's a fact, as you can see in the Tanakh and even from history. It's just a fact. It only took a few years to rebuild it. So the reason they make that claim is, in order to substantiate their claim still, they claim that it's from the fall of the first temple to the fall of the second temple. That's the way they justify it. Okay? So that makes it a total package, right? And as a total package, they're saying from the fall of the first to the fall of the second. That's what I mean. That's their total package. But by making a total package, you can debunk it as a total package, because you're then fixating the importance, like the pivoting point is on the dates. And then their evidence, therefore, is pivoting on conjecture that the historical calendar is off. Where is your evidence for that? If you can't provide evidence for that, then it is just conjecture. And if you're pivoting all your weight of evidence on a pivoting point that is just conjecture, then your argument falls apart. Okay? So what is their evidence that the dates of the historical calendars are off? Because, I mean, you're not just arguing with opinions of scholars, tablets, statues, records from many nations. You're arguing with scientific dating machines even. You're making a huge argument to say that the dating's off. But that's why I have Chabad's chronology of the timeline of Jewish history here. And like I already said at the start of my video, I've mapped it out, and what I can see with my own eyeballs in the Tanakh lines up with Chabad and what Judaism says up until a certain point, and then they go off by about 200 years. So, starting with Adam, Adam was 130 when he had Seth. Seth was 105 when he had Enos. Enos was 90 when he had Canaan. Canaan was 70 when he had, I abbreviated the name, M-A-H. I can't remember which one that is, Mahaleel or whatever. I don't know. Mahaleel or whatever was 65 when he had Jared. Jared was 162 when he had Enoch. Enoch was 65 when he had Methuselah. Methuselah was 187 when he had Lamech. Lamech was 182 when he had Noah. Noah was 500 years old when he had Shem. Sorry. Noah was 500 plus 100 to the flood too. Hold on. 156. 500. Maybe that's why. Maybe Shem was 102. In either case, I know my numbers are right. I just didn't make enough verbal notes here. So Noah was 500 when... Hold on. I'm going to have to check here. So happens when you don't make enough notes. I didn't make note whether Noah was 500 when he had Shem or whether Noah was... Anyways, let me check this real quick. 1556. 1558. Yeah, okay, so that's correct. So I agree with... Chabad's timeline agrees with mine all the way up to Noah. Noah was 500 when he had Shem. That would make it 1556 years after Adam's creation. Okay, on Chabad's chronology here, which is the one that I'm pretty sure all Judaism uses, they have 1558. Close enough, 2 years, right? And that's probably the 2 years down here, so I'm not worried about that. It's 1558, same thing. So we agree up to that point. In my very basic notes here, I'm not expanding things and rechecking everything again. I know that the numbers are correct. I think it says 100 years to the flood, and then plus 2 years after. So I think it was 2 years after the flood, Shem had Arphaxad, whatever his name is. So 2 years after the flood, Shem had Arphaxad. Then when Arphaxad was 35, he had Salah. And then when Salah was 30, he had Eber. When Eber was 34, he had Peleg. And when Peleg was 30, he had Reu. And when Reu was 32, he had Serug. And when Serug was 30, he had Nahor. And when Nahor was 29, he had Terah. When Terah was 70, he had Abraham. Okay, when Abraham was 100, he had Isaac. And when Isaac was 60, he had Jacob. Okay, so looking at the Jewish chronological timeline here, right, we see that it matches with what I saw with my own eyes in the Tanakh all the way up to Noah, up to the flood, essentially, right? And then let's pick another one. Peleg. Peleg was born in 1757. Let's check that here. Yep, 1757. Peleg was born. So we agree there. Abraham would have been born 1948 AC. So we go check here. Yep, still agrees with the Jewish chronology. 1948, Abraham was born. So what I'm getting to is where do they go off by 160 or 200 years, right? We're gonna crack down on that. So that would mean that when Abraham was 100, he had Isaac, which would be 100 years after 1948, which is 2048. Okay, and what does it say on here? 2048. 2048, Isaac was born from Abraham, so we're still in agreement there. And we know from the Tanakh that when Isaac was 60, he had Jacob. So that means that that's in 2108, right here, 2108, Jacob and Esau were born. So we're still agreeing the two chronological timelines. And then this is where it differs with Jacob when he goes into Egypt. Now the Tanakh says that Jacob was 130 years old when he went into Egypt, okay, which would give 2238 AC. The Tanakh then tells us that they spent 430 years in Egypt, which gives you 2668. Very, very simple. There's two verses. It says that he was 130 when he went into Egypt, and then there's another verse in Tanakh that says, your children will be in Egypt. By children, it means not Abraham, it means the children, meaning Jacob and after. That your children will be in Egypt 430 years. They'll be oppressed for 400, but they'll be in Egypt for 430. So two simple verses brings you to 2,668. That number is actually widely accepted by a lot of people, by a lot of scholars, even by some rabbis. But if we go and compare here, we just saw how it's not my timeline, but the biblical timeline literally agrees exactly with what Chabad provides here, all the way up to, what was it, even the birth of Isaac in 2108. Let's just double check again. 2108, the birth of Jacob in 2108. Yes, that's right. And then, does it record the year when Jacob went to Egypt? Oh, sorry, the Exodus, 430 years later, would be 2668. So if you go look at here, what date do they get for the Exodus? 2448. So 200 years have gone missing here. And we're talking about, the Bible is explicitly detailed every single year up until Jacob. It even tells you how old Jacob was when he went into Egypt and all of that. He was 130 years old when they went into Egypt. And you have another verse that says that your children will be in Egypt for 430 years. That means they'll come out of Egypt, which was what? The Exodus. After 430 years, which is 2,668. Where on earth do you lose 200 years in that? I don't understand. Like, Judaism's count is off by 200 years. And I've heard various different explanations for it, but I'm sorry, but a lot of them are just, they don't hold any weight. Not at all. They're all made out of desperation, in my opinion, to try to latch on to this interpretation of Daniel 9 and the timeline and everything, right? And just everything involved with the timeline as well. So, but the Tanakh meticulously, explicitly details all the years, and you get to the mathematical result of 2,668 for the Exodus from Adam's creation. So we can see right there, bam, 200 years off. If we go read Jews for Judaism, they say that the historical calendars are off 166 years. Okay, well, you see the pretzel, the conundrum that I'm presented with here, right? They claim, conjecture, the calendars are off 160 years. We go look at their own calendar magically vanishes away 200 years off the face of the planet. So where'd the 200 years go? I don't understand it. It's impossible. Okay, so it doesn't make any sense. But that's just one point, right? So if they want to claim that, here's a very good logical point. The Tanakh starts counting from the creation of Adam. That's nothing to do with the Gregorian calendar. You have to actually marry the two calendars together, stitch them together at a meeting point, okay? Because Gregorian has a 0, goes infinitely into the future, AD, and goes infinitely into the past, BC. You could have 10 trillion BC. You could have 10 trillion AD. That's how Gregorian works. The biblical calendar Judaism uses, the AC after creation calendar, is based on a fixed point 0. Okay? It's got nothing as the creation of Adam, and then everything counts forward from there. There's no going back. It's from a fixed 0 cornerstone going onwards. It's a complete different design to a Gregorian calendar and how it works. Okay? Now, the logical point I'm getting to is, if you want to claim that it can't be Jesus because the numbers don't fit, and history has the wrong calendar, the historical calendar is wrong by 160 years, you have to have some good reasoning to back up that conjecture. Okay, what would their reasoning be? It could only be the biblical record of time. You can't have anything else. You can't say, I have a magic bunny rabbit that tells me everything. It's the biblical timeline. You map through the biblical timeline, like I just did. It agrees exactly with what they claim up until when Jacob goes into Egypt. And then suddenly 200 years goes missing. So I would love to hear somebody meticulously lay out and explain and prove those 200 missing years. Okay? And dare I say that the reason these 200 years or 166, whatever it might be, at the end of the day, the reason this period of time is chopped away, I think is done not solely, exclusively, but in part to invalidate Jesus. Because I think people back in the day were presented with to their own horror, tremendous evidence for Jesus in an attempt to utterly refute it beyond any reasonable reasons. They had to grasp desperately for straws in the dark. And at the end of the day, it's hard to disprove something that's just a fact. So the only way they could do is by changing the times and calendars, by claiming that they're wrong. In order to do that, they'd have to take the biblical calendar. This is sorry, I went a little bit off topic. You take the biblical AC calendar going from 0 up to 2,448 or 2,660, whatever year, arbitrarily, any year. You have to then marry that to the Gregorian. The only way you can do that is through a fixed point in time that we have good historical record for. For example, King Artaxerxes, 454 BC. If you don't believe him, fine. Pick anything else. It doesn't matter. It's all arbitrary. You could pick year 0. If we pick year 0, we know that 2023 years have transpired since year 0. Okay? We know that it's year 0. So that's point B. Our point, there might be an A, B, and a C here. So that might be point C. Then point A is the start of 0 with Adam. So where is the point B? That's the unknown. That's the variable we're trying to solve. So where would point B be? Well, it's where the two meet. And that's where you have to do the math. But, alright, take care. Oh, is there an update on the lady? Is it worse or better?
The lady is on life support. And the doctor is like, the chances is just a miracle.
Yeah. Alright. Let me regain my train of thought. So anyway, it's like I'm saying, what you have to do is marry the AC calendar to the verified historical calendar. It means you have to pick a point where you're going to match the two. And they have to be trustworthy to match them. Okay, so you could pick any point from 0 going back a couple hundred years, whatever, right? The further you get into the Babylonian invasion time, historical records kind of get obscured, right, and become a bit more murky, right? So you could just pick year 0, right? Like I'm saying, we know 2023 years have transpired. There's a year 0. We have an unknown period of time, the variable we're trying to solve, like simple algebra, okay? The Bible tells us that there's been 2,500 years or whatever, 2,668 years, okay? You got these big periods of time, and you have to go through the homework and the work to find where they meet together. But all of this is murky waters, okay? And to come out claiming that, oh, well, the calendars are wrong because we have this biblical count. Your biblical count comes from a 0. It's not on the Gregorian calendar. You cannot come out and then say that the historical calendar is off, because you're taking another piece of cloth and trying to stitch it onto a bigger garment. You can't stitch it on and then claim that the garment is off. You know what I mean? There's no perfect way to stitch that on, because they're completely unrelated calendars. Unless every year, biblically and historically, was meticulously accounted for, which it wasn't, because we have this period of unknown. Only if it was meticulously accounted for could we all just sit down and say, oh, well, we have everything accounted for, there's no arguing, right? But we have this room for argument. Because of that, it's murky waters, and Judaism can't come out here saying that, oh, we keep better historical record keeping. We have better chronology, like they claimed on Jews for Judaism. To make such a claim, you gotta have some good, heavy evidence to back it up. Their evidence is the biblical chronology. The biblical chronology loses 200 years at one point, but ignoring that, the biblical chronology ends around the time of Babylon, and it stops. There's no more books of the Tanakh, so it just ends there. So you're only ever going to have 2.5 or 3.5, whatever it is, 1,000 years of biblical chronology accounted for, and then after that, you don't have diddly squat. You have a variable, an unknown period of time, and you have the difficulty of trying to match that up with verified known history. Okay, and if your very premise is that, historical record shouldn't be verified, it's not verifiable because we think it's off, if that's your very premise, then you have therefore made it impossible to marry the AC calendar to the Gregorian. If you're saying that the dates are wrong, where's the basis for this? You see what I mean? There's so many reasons Yeah, I may not have worded that the best way, but I think everybody gets my point, right? There's many reasons why Judaism's interpretation of Daniel 9 does not make any sense. Okay? From all those reasons. And finish off the video on Daniel 9:26. It says, "And after the week 60 and 2 shall be cut off Messiah." Now, well, I'll read the rest. But not for himself. And the city and the sanctuary shall destroy the people of the prince who is to come, and the end of it shall be with a flood until the end of the war, determined desolation. So, without fussing over, there's lots of little arguments in this one too. But the basic gist of this one is that an anointed guy would be cut off. I'm not going to fuss over words and what cut off means. Who cares? There's an anointed guy, whether it's Jesus, the Messiah, or some anointed guy, whatever. There's an anointed guy, and after the anointed guy, there's big bad stuff and war and invasion going to happen with Israel. Basic gist of things. Everybody will agree on that. Okay? So who was this anointed guy? So let's put aside all the silly little side argument. Who is this anointed guy? Could he be Jesus? It says after the 62 weeks. Where he talked about the 7. No matter how you slice the cake, you got 7 and then 62. You can fuss over the slicing. Don't matter because it's 483. After 483, it says Messiah is cut off, but Judaism's claim is that the two Messiah figures, the anointed ones, are completely different. That's why they got to make the claim the first one is Cyrus, spread apart by hundreds of years before the second one. Because if they start saying that they're one the same, that would give credence to from point A to point B is 483 years. So they got to murky the waters by doing all the other cobwebs, like I said. At the end of the day, from point A to point B is 483 years. Point A is the decree to rebuild Jerusalem street and wall. Point B is the Messiah. And Judaism refuses to believe the two mentions of the anointed one are one the same one, anointed one, but it's just what it is. Okay? So after the 62 weeks shall be cut off Messiah. So according to Judaism, this was some anointed guy who was cut off. Now, who was this anointed guy? I mean, if we trust the historical date of 586, we count forward 490 years, we come to 103 to 96 BC. We have Aristobulus and then King Alexander who were ruling. Both of them were the greatest character. Aristobulus had his own brother killed out of suspicion, then he died from grief. And then King Alexander, he wasn't cut off, he went on to rule for 30 years. So both of them aren't fitting. And on top of that, Judaism says the 483 years ends with the fall of the Second Temple, which is 69 or 70 AD. I mean, who was your anointed guy at that time? Okay? So I believe that all these claims are made, and claiming that the calendar is off, that is a necessity for Judaism to make the very strong seeming claims that they make, that the dates don't fit with Jesus, and they say, oh well, look, Daniel 9:26 says that the anointed one will be cut off, and we say that's in 70 AD, and look, it says right after that the sanctuary will be destroyed, there's a big invasion. Oh, it sounds like we're right. That's the way Judaism presents it. Oh, 7 weeks after Babylon invasion, oh, look at that, history says we got Cyrus. Oh, we must be right. And then 434 years later, oh, what do you know? The Second Temple's destroyed. That sounds all juicy and convenient, but it's literally pivoting on claiming that the historical record is off by like 160 or 200 years. So if you want to pivot all your evidence on something, that pivot better be pretty strong, but it ain't, because it's just conjecture. They would never will have evidence for it, because you're marrying two completely unrelated calendars together. And the point where they're marrying together, the Babylonian invasion time, that's a period of a time where records were lost. So, and the Bible stopped being written. So you argue for the next 10,000 years, you're not going to have any further evidence for that claim. It's just going to be conjecture from here to the end of time. You already had 2,000 years. You can wait another 8,000 years, nothing's going to change. It's still going to be the same thing. It's going to be conjecture. And at the end of the day, you weigh in the basket the evidence Judaism presents, their interpretation, which rewords things, changes what Daniel actually said, ignores the fact that Persia was a bad empire ruled by a bad idolatrous guy. I mean, all the evidence that I went through, ignoring all of that, for their claim it goes from the first temple's destruction to the second. I mean, let's go read this again. Jews for Judaism, and Judaism as a whole, says that the 483 years is to be measured from the fall of the first temple to the fall of the second. Let's go read Daniel here. Is that what it says? Therefore, know and understand. That's the opening words. Know and understand. It doesn't say, therefore, imagine and get confused. It says, know and understand. That means, hey, get ready to know something and get ready to understand something. Means I'm not going to give you riddles and fancy waffle fluffy talk, right? Therefore, know and understand from the going forth of the command. I mean, that's pretty straightforward instruction right there. Know and understand from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem. That's like your dad comes out one day and says, child, from my command for you to clean your room until I slap you across the side of the head is going to be 483 seconds. You know what I mean? It's from the going forth of the command to clean your room until I slap you across the face. 7, you see what I mean? Anyways, but what Daniel says is know and understand from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, week 7 and week 60 and 2 again, and shall be built the street and wall even in troublesome times. That is completely different from what Judaism says it actually says. They say it says, oh no, from the fall of the first temple until the fall of the second. I don't see that written anywhere here. Do I see anything in any type of wording from the fall of the first temple? No. The point A is from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem, not from the fall of the first temple. You just imagine that an imaginary command went out at the time of the fall to rebuild. I mean, come on. You can't get more conjecture than that, right? So we don't see that. And then it says until Messiah the Prince. Well, they claim it's Cyrus, who was a king. You know what I mean? No matter how you look at it, the entire way through 925, I'm not repeating everything I said in this video, every single aspect of 925, they chop, change, twist around to suit their motive. Okay? In every desperate attempt, even with the cake slices, with the 7 and 62, every attempt to discredit Jesus. And they don't even have a viable candidate. They don't even have it narrowed down to like 1 or 2 people. They don't know who the anointed guy was who got cut off. They don't know. Oh, was it King Agrippa? Was it the sacrifices? Was it a priest? No, well, it was apparently some anointed guy. You know what I mean? Got the whole Bible here. Well, thousands of years of mankind, God's sending us this important message in the Bible, and he's going to mention, you know, an anointed guy. You'd think he'd be important, but don't even know who he is, what he did, why he's mentioned. I guess God was just bored and thought, hey, I'm just going to mention an anointed guy got cut off. You'll never know who it is, but it's so important I'm going to mention it. You know what I mean? Didn't you consider for a second that maybe it's an important anointed guy? I mean, calling it Mashiach Nagid doesn't invalidate the fact that it could be the Messiah. It's not like that's proof that it's not the Messiah. It could still be the Messiah. You know what I mean? And a prince is a prince before he becomes a king. Every king is going to be a prince before he becomes a king. So King Messiah's got to be Prince Messiah before he becomes King Messiah. But anyways, God bless you all, folks. I've taken enough time on this.